Hi folks, welcome to our second video, which is going to for this chapter, which is formulating the reward and compensation strategy. You recall at the end of our first video for this segment, we ended on looking at the steps that are involved in formulating the compensation strategy. And the first step that we discussed was, or identified, was defining the behavior that we want from our people. So let's look at that first step in a little more detail. For some firms, high levels of membership, task, or citizenship behavior may be nice, but maybe not worth the cost. For others, high levels of membership, task, or citizenship behavior, one or more of them, might be essential, right? So to understand the relative importance of all three types of behavior, you need to understand the organization's context. Remember we talked about that in Chapter 2. We talked about organization context, the structure of the organization, and the linkage between the two, which comes from the managerial strategy. So the most important concept here is to think about the managerial strategy, because certain managerial strategies that companies use, so how they treat their people, how they manage them, is going to determine the kinds of reactions that employees have or how they behave, right? So let's say, for example, we look at membership behavior. We might want to be an organization high in membership behavior, which is, consistent with, say, a human relations as well as a high involvement organization. Right? But that means that we may not want to have high turnover. We want people to feel like they belong, like their jobs. And then we might also want to look at, if we want to entice them to remain with us, are we looking more at building affective commitment? Okay, which is really an attachment that an employee has to an organization based on the feelings they have about that company. They have a good vibe, good feelings, they believe in the culture, so they want to stay. Or is the kind of membership behavior we're generating continuance commitment? Maybe, that's, if you recall from an earlier chapter, continuance commitment or membership behavior that's based on continuance commitment means, well, I'm attached to the organization because I really can't find an organization that's going to offer me better than what I have. So in some instances, these people would be the ones who kind of quit and stayed. We mentioned that before. They know they can't do better anywhere else, so they stay with you. But if they're doing a meaningful job for you and it might be hard to replace them, that might be okay for you. But if you think membership behavior is something that you want to build, then your managerial strategy has to reflect that. And a human relations as well as high involvement organizations are going to want high levels of membership behavior. What about task behavior? Well, if the tasks, are they simple or are they complex? Do they require a lot of supervision? Okay. Are high levels of performance required? That's going to determine the level to which you want high task behavior. So remember, if you've got a classical organization, the amount of commitment that you have to task behavior is pretty important. Remember, cooked foods are chicken gutters, right? The tasks are simple, right? So they'd want high levels of task behavior, right? If you're a human relations managerial style, right, you'd need some task behavior, but maybe not as high as you'd want in a classical organization, right? And also in high involvement, they would certainly require high degrees or high task behavior from their people, because don't forget, some of their tasks may be more complex. Remember LSE galvanizing? We were training these people to do more than one job. So the tasks might be simple, but in some jobs they may be complex. So we want to make sure that we choose a compensation strategy that's going to recognize that, right? So again, and again here, high performance is very much required for LSE galvanizing where they're high involvement. So again, we would want high amounts of task behavior from people in high involvement. And again, even in classical, but the tasks in a classical managerial organization are probably more simple and more routinized, whereas in a high involvement, they might be more complex, and we would be expecting higher levels of performance. If we're trying to develop more citizenship behavior, you probably don't want that if you're using a classical managerial strategy, right? Human relations strategy, well, again, they would want some citizenship behavior. They want people to go above and beyond, but not a lot. But high involvement wants it a lot, right? So again, the extent to which an employee shows extra initiative, has other ideas, makes an incredible difference to the organization's performance, we really are getting that out of them because we're creating citizenship behavior amongst those employees. So certainly it would be very, very important to evoke that kind of behavior in employees if we're high involvement. Certainly not important at all if you're a classical managerial strategy, as Cook Foods was, and even some piecework organizations, right? And in human relations managerial strategies, they would be trying to develop some, but it's not as critical. So once you know the kind of behavior you want, you've got to make sure you have a managerial strategy that supports that. If we look at the second step in the formulation of the compensation strategy, we're going to look at what's the role of compensation. Well, don't forget, in classical organizations, compensation is going to focus more on extrinsic or meeting the basic needs of people. If you think back to Maslow's hierarchy, the psychological, safety, security kind of needs, right? Human relations organizations want to focus more on meeting those middle level needs in the hierarchy, the social needs, but high involvement organizations want to focus on developing employees, making sure they learn more skills, increase their participation in making decisions in the organization, increasing their potential for career growth by skilling them, teaching them new things. So again, what role is compensation going to have? Again, you'd want to make sure that you're compensating people for learning more skills and becoming more value to the organization. Those were the skill blocks we referred to as well in an earlier video, right? As people are going to go through the skill blocks and get more skills, we should be paying them more to recognize that, right? But to some extent too, you also have to remember that when employees are developing these skills, it's building their confidence. They have a higher need for achievement. They're recognizing achievement. So we're not only focusing strictly on the extrinsic, we're also focusing on developing their intrinsic motivation here. Human relations organizations focus on the social needs, which meets a bit of both, intrinsic and extrinsic, but classical organizations are focusing more on meeting just the extrinsic needs, which is the put the money in the table so I can eat kind of needs. Right? If we look at organizations, so if we look at the third step, okay, in the elements that are involved in formulating the compensation strategy, we can look at the required mix of compensation elements. So let's say, for example, we were looking at a not-for-profit organization like UNICEF. Right? If we're looking at UNICEF, we have to remember as a not-for-profit, that organization is probably having their people who work with them being more extrinsically motivated by giving them social rewards that they might get from mingling with like-minded volunteers, for example. And that will result in crafting or creating more membership behavior in the organization. But of course, the success of this reward strategy is going to depend on the availability of people who have the time to contribute to the causes that UNICEF supports and whose goals and needs are similar or identical with those of UNICEF and whose economic needs have already been met by other means. So sometimes we think of retirees because they've already got a set pension, a set income. Maybe they might be more inclined to get involved in philanthropic and not-for-profit kind of needs and meeting them. We usually find that where we have families that are, dual income, or they have very active social lives with their children as well as work lives, they're not usually the ones who are volunteering too much. It's the ones who have already kind of got their financial needs met, so they're looking more for the intrinsic motivation that they get out of volunteering. Right? So again, if we look at that, task behavior here, or membership and task behavior, are motivated by intrinsic rewards in an organization like UNICEF, but task behavior is motivated by the knowledge that performing some of these easier tasks is helping to support the mission and the vision and what UNICEF supports, which is saving the lives of children in the third world. So again, your intrinsic motivation helps to promote this task behavior as well as this membership behavior. If we're looking at tree planting, for example, and we're looking at that, okay, and looking at developing or determining a compensation mix there. Well, don't forget, when we're tree planting, we're undertaking reforestation, which means we're planting trees that maybe have been cut down in the past. Maybe we're mining or we're extracting timber to build, and we want to replant trees, or we have an area that is in need of trees, we're reforesting it, right? So again, when we look at the tree planting, one of the primary motivators for doing the tree planting would be money. And in fact, that's why up in northern parts of Canada, many times they get students to replant the trees. They do this in the summer as a summer job because they know the students would not only be motivated by, the environmental benefits from tree planting, but also they're motivated by the money because they need the money to go to school, right? So the pay can be used to foster both the necessary membership behavior to keep them motivated to do the task, because they need the money, and they're committed to the task because they see it from an environmental perspective. So again, money would be very important. If we're looking at the electronic firm that they describe in the textbook, again, this firm is practicing a high involvement strategy. And we can see that they're using a lot of intrinsic motivation, or trying to develop a lot of intrinsic motivation, because people are developing their own level of expertise and knowledge through the training that they're providing them. People are responding positively to that. And they also will derive some extrinsic rewards because every time they build in their task abilities, the company is paying them. So the primary purpose of the compensation system here would be to motivate membership behavior and also to foster citizenship behavior. And how do they do that? Well, through profit sharing, the employee stock ownership program. So all of those performance-based and organizational performance-based things that are important to people to keep them going that extra mile for the customer, for the company, over and above their job in order to promote that citizenship behavior. So you have to know what kinds of compensation elements are going to promote the types of behaviors that you want from your people. All right. So now that we've looked at that, one of the next step is to look at and this is the fourth step, is to look at determining the compensation level. So you need to determine, am I going to lag the market? Maybe you're a public sector organization and you might not be able to afford to pay high levels of entry-level compensation in terms of dollars and cents, but maybe you offer other things. Maybe you've got a very good indirect compensation package for pensions, for benefits, right? Maybe you offer people time off work with pay, maybe a better vacation plan, right? So you can maybe afford to lag the market if people know the other things that you give are better. You might decide you want to lead the market. Maybe that's because you're having a challenge getting qualified workers into your organization. Maybe they're in short supply. Maybe you work in an environment that's not maybe very desirable. Maybe you work in the tobacco industry, right? And sometimes it's hard to find people to commit to go into there, depending on the job, because they don't support that industry because of what it stands for. They might say, oh, it promotes lung cancer or some kind of cancer. They don't want to work there. So you might decide sometimes you have to leave the market. In some cases, depending on the job, you might decide matching is okay, particularly if the jobs are quite generic. Say an HR generalist, an accountant, an administrative assistant. These are titles that are very well known and very common in the labor market. So you might decide, hey, I can get those skills locally. So I just need to know what other companies in my area are paying, and maybe I just need to match the market for those kinds of things. So you have to determine what level of compensation is appropriate for an entry level and then build from there. If you want to focus on building membership behavior once they're in, then you might decide you want to give them bigger pay increases if they perform. So those kinds of things. But when you're just trying to decide how much to pay them when they're coming in, it's either a lead, lag, or match. Right? We can also look at hybrid compensation policies. We talked about this in a previous video, and your text talks about it as well. Sometimes the compensation level that we'll offer depends on the job, right? I might find for salespeople, I'm using more commission. For administrative assistants, I'm using more merit pay or merit bonus, right? I might find that for all my employees, I might want to have an employee stock purchase program. They should all be able to share in the organization-wide achievements. If the stock price goes up, why shouldn't our employees share in that? And one of the best ways and most economical ways to allow that is to give them an opportunity to buy into your stock purchase program, right? So again, it depends. It'll vary across the employee and what the organization values. If you want to promote citizenship behavior, then you have to give people a part of those organization-wide benefits, which would be, your profit sharing and your employee stock ownership programs that we talked about in the previous chapter. A firm could choose to lag for entry-level positions, right? Especially if people have little or no experience, say a new grad from a college or university, right? Especially if a lot of new grads are applying for jobs, which we know they are. But it could lead to higher level positions, as we've said before, and they'll make up whatever they didn't get at the entry level. Once they come in, they get trained and they prove themselves, right? So the nature of the compensation mix is going to determine the amount of compensation that you actually pay, because you have to consider what you can afford to pay. So if we look at evaluating as the final step our compensation strategy, we have to look at whatever compensation strategy we pick, we have to be able to afford it. We have to make sure that it meets all the minimum legal requirements and that it's not only sufficient for us to attract employees, but we have to be able to maintain and keep employees if membership behavior and citizenship behavior is very important to us. So that concludes our second video segment on Chapter 6, Formulating the Reward and Compensation Strategy. So stay tuned to the third and final video, which is going to look a lot more at some special issues in compensation revolving around contingent or part-time workers, CEOs and executives, as well as expatriate and foreign employees.